You're listening to Just Believe, sponsored by Just Believe Recovery Centers, with your host, Brenda Swift, as she discusses all aspects of addiction, recovery, and sober living. And now, your host of Just Believe, Brenda Swift.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of our new listeners to Just Believe Radio. I'm Brenda. I'm your host, and we are on the Talk of the Palm Beaches, 900 a.m., Monday through Saturday at 3 p.m., We have a call-in hotline for anyone that needs help or wants to speak to somebody to get some information about someone that they care about that needs addiction help. That number is 877-309-3635, and that's 877-309-3635. We have a guest on the line today, very wonderful young woman. She's been in recovery for quite some time now. I have asked Brittany to tell her story and her experience, and I'd like to welcome to the show Brittany.
Hi, Brenda. How are you?
I'm good, Brittany. How are you?
I'm good.
We were talking a little bit, going over some of the details about your recovery, and that you do have some distinct points that are quite a bit different than a lot of the people that we've had on the show so far. We'll get into a little bit of that as we go along. We did mention that you don't have the typical alcoholic family history that kind of starts the ball rolling. Is that right?
Right. No. My mom and my father, they might have experienced it when they were younger, but they didn't have a problem.
So how were you introduced to drugs and alcohol? Actually, alcohol wasn't really your thing. It was primarily drugs, if I recall.
Right. Like when I was younger, I would drink on the weekends, and I really didn't like drinking, but I did it anyway. I experienced, I think I was a senior, and I was introduced to a painkiller. It was a low dosage, so I would, do those on the weekends. And then I got introduced to Xanax, which I was prescribed to for 5 years. And, after doing the low milligram of the painkiller, I needed something more. So I guess you could say the 30 milligrams of the oxycodone is what I eventually started to do.
Now, with the painkillers, were they for a particular injury or something to that effect, or that was kind of a recreational thing that happened at a party and just kind of picked up speed over the period of time from there?
I started doing them at parties. They were just available. And then I eventually went to the doctor, and I started getting the 15 milligrams. So it was kind of a party thing, and then somehow I ended up getting prescribed them, which really, I didn't need them, but I guess you could say I lied to get them.
Of course. That's how it works.
Yeah.
So what was the effect that you liked? What was was it just being able to relax around people, or what?
Yes. Yes.
Kind of took off from there?
Right. I was very, antisocial. So with these combination of pills inside of me, I felt like I could be around anybody, and I can talk about anything.
So you had a lot of anxiety that you were working with from the beginning, and that kind of took care of it for you.
Yes, that's why I had gotten prescribed the Xanax.
Okay. So, yes, we become witty and come up with all these things to say that you can't think of when anxiety is an issue. So I totally understand what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
When did it start to progress for you? Over what kind of period of time are we talking about from the first time you tried it?
Within probably a year and a half, I was totally gone. Totally gone.
And that was there any sustained, were you still in school, or were you working, or?
Well, like I said, I started experimenting, in my senior year, so thank God I did graduate. If it would have happened any sooner, I probably would not have. But it progressed within the year and a half, and like I said, I was totally gone.
Did your mom or anyone in your family notice that something was going on with you? Were they aware of the issue?
My mom sort of picked up, like something wasn't right with me. I was constantly falling asleep. I have two little sisters, and for them to see what I was going through is not something that two younger girls should be seeing. Like, why are you falling asleep? Well, what's going on? My mom would videotape me just to show me the next day. And I, at the time, I'm like, there's nothing wrong. I'm just tired. But yeah, she picked up, and by the end of it, she was definitely not happy with me.
Of course. Did she had no experience with any kind of prescription pills herself then to know?
No.
She just knew that something was really wrong.
Yes.
And you also shared some time in treatment we talked about earlier with your sister, and that was part of your story as well. Were you both involved with the prescription drugs at that time together, or was your path kind of on your own?
She actually started a little bit before me. She was younger. She got into it, and then somehow we ended up both getting into it. And she went to treatment in like 2009, and then I went to treatment in 2012, and I went to a state fund facility, but we went down to Florida together, and I went through a lot of feelings with her because she couldn't stay clean. She just wasn't ready.
And it definitely takes a lot of commitment to be able to be ready. Now, the difference between the two of you and the path that it's taken for both of you is pretty distinct. Just to let anybody know that's just joining us, we're at Just Believe Radio. And I am talking to my guest, Brittany, who's telling us a pretty unique story in comparison to a lot of the ones that we hear on a daily basis in addiction. Your path with recovery didn't have to reach any of the levels that we hear about quite a bit. Is that right, Brittany?
Right. Like I said, I went to treatment in 2012. It was a state fund facility, and I was so confused and so lost. I had no idea what they were doing. They were reading by a Bible. They were reading, scriptures from literature and telling their stories. And I felt like I didn't fit in because, I was just there because, my mom sent me there and I was doing pills and, that was it. So I was, really confused. I knew nothing about AA or NA. I knew nothing about that. So I felt like I was so lost and confused on what they were talking about. I had no idea what anything meant. So I ended up, releasing myself. I signed out early. I was there for 10 days, knowing that I was just going to go use. So it took me, not even a day for me to start using again. It did progress. I ended up, doing the mixture of the pills and heroin for 3 months. And, I did things that I, regret doing. But again, I didn't think it was bad. I never thought that my story, because my story not being as, like the others, when I was in the treatment center in New Jersey, that I wasn't bad and these people are crazy. I would never do something like that. But again, it did progress, and again, it progressed for 3 months. And then one day my sister was like, "Oh, well, I'm going to go to Florida." And I'm like, "Okay, for what?" She's like, "I'm going to get into detox and treatment." And I'm like, "You're crazy. I just left the place, and we're nothing like these people. Why would you even go?"
And
I slept on it for... Go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. A lot of what you're going into a state-run facility like that, you're getting a lot of the people that have had a tremendous amount of consequences. And you had mentioned that you couldn't relate to any of those. You hadn't lost things. You hadn't gone to the extent that a lot of them do once they get to the state-run facilities. So you kind of felt like a complete, not only a fish out of water, but from what you were saying when we spoke last night, the comparisons that we do in when we're still in our addiction and trying to find ways out of being ready to change anything, that's a very normal thing, but you were actually not hearing anything you related to because that type of bottom hadn't happened for you. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. So was there anything at that point in the state-run facility that you could relate to?
No, I had, not at all. Not at all. And I think that's why I was like, I got to get out of here. But again, it was obviously because I wasn't ready. I had plans to leave there to use. I wasn't, I guess, willing and open-minded about, why I was there. And there really is a problem, but I just couldn't see it.
Of course. We are going to need to take a quick break here. We are talking to Brittany about her story in recovery and addiction. And we have a number of new parts that we get to hear about, and we'll be right back.
At Just Believe Recovery Center, their highly trained staff has a combined 50 years in recovery and is certified to help with each client's individual needs. The program at Just Believe Recovery Center brings those suffering from addiction and their families the understanding needed to begin healing from the devastation and begin the path to a new and fulfilling life in recovery. The staff understands what addiction has done to your family and that no one chooses to become sick. At Just Believe Recovery Center, with a therapeutic process and a caring staff that understands addiction, their clients can choose to become well. Go to justbelieveradio.com for more details and call their 24-hour hotline today, 877-309-3635. That's 877-309-3635 for caring guidance and an end to the pain of addiction now. Just believe there is another chance and call 877-309-3635 today.
Welcome back to Just Believe, sponsored by Just Believe Recovery Centers, with your host, Brenda Swift, as she discusses all aspects of addiction, recovery, and sober living. Now, back to your host, Brenda Swift.
Welcome back. I am Brenda, your host of Just Believe Radio, and we are on the line with our guest, Brittany, today. For anyone that does hear anything that they can relate to and thinks that there might be a problem that they'd like to talk to somebody about, the number is 877-309-3635. And welcome back, Brittany.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
I actually was able to meet both you and your sister when you came down. You're in New Jersey, right?
Yes.
And that's where both of you did return to. Now, what was the process? You mentioned that Brianna was already booking this treatment trip, and you really didn't know that much about it?
Right. She was like, I'm going to Florida. And I'm like, you're crazy. And I slept on it. And the next day, she was still, about it. So I was like, all right, you know what? I'll go. I'll be there for 30 days, and I'll come home, and, I'll be fine. So we ended up getting on a plane. I was very nervous. I was scared. Something felt a little bit different than the last time that I went to the facility in New Jersey. I wasn't sure what it was, but I was nervous. Definitely nervous.
So at that point, you hadn't had a lot of the consequences that you do in addiction, nothing close to what your sister had experienced. And
right.
Were you convinced that you were in need of treatment or just kind of showing up for her and see what happens?
Honestly, I was just showing up for her.
Mm-hmm.
We'll get clean together.
Knowing, of course, like we talked about, that when there's more than one person using in the home, that it's impossible for the other person to get clean and come back and sustain that.
Right. I've heard that. And like I said, I was nervous. I wasn't sure where we were going to go from there, but I was just going with it.
And not at all convinced that it was for you. It was more about her. Absolutely. So when you got to Florida and actually got into the treatment center, was it obviously quite a bit different than what you'd experienced with the state-run facility?
Yes, it was very different. I remember, going into the detox, and that's where I had met you face-to-face finally.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up in the detox center. I'm sorry, the treatment center. And I was overwhelmed with how nice everybody was.
Not at all what you'd experienced before?
What was that?
Not at all what you'd experienced before in New Jersey?
It was almost like I was in this place before. Nobody knew what they were talking about. So, and it was almost like they were there because they needed to be there. With Just Believe, everybody was very nice, caring. They were willing to help me get to where I needed to be.
And that is Just Believe Recovery Center in Jensen Beach, Florida. And we also have a hotline here today for anyone that is looking for some solutions or some idea of what direction to go. If they hear anything in Brittany's story they can relate to, the number is 877-309-3635. Now, you mentioned being nervous when you came in, and of course detox is a different thing where the medical portion of the drugs, you are medically detoxed and it takes everything out of your system so there's no sickness. And then the treatment portion is a whole different thing. How did you start to deal with the anxiety that you were working with there?
I would take deep breaths. When I met with, the counselor the first time, she gave me work to get through my anxiety. Whether it was, just worksheets or like meditation or how to, breathe when you're feeling like you're going to have a panic attack.
Right. And there's a lot of different tools. That's the great part about treatment is one, removing you from the place that is all the has all the triggers that continues the cycle, and then second is bringing in different tools to deal with the anxiety, because I think we all deal with that anxiety, especially when we're coming off of the drugs and alcohol. That is the biggest thing that makes us want to run, and that feeling is being in it, surrounded by people that are there to help, makes a really big difference. So at what point did you start to realize that this was something that applied to you separate from your sister?
I was probably there for about 7 to 10 days before I started to realize, okay, this is where I need to be. Between different stories and my counselor saying my story ends when it needs to end. I don't have to go through a lot of other things just to make me hit a bottom.
And that's the biggest part of your story that strikes me. You've been clean for how long now?
I'm coming up on 2 years.
And a lot of people do think that, when they hear stories about addiction and that they haven't gotten to this stage yet, this hasn't happened, I haven't been arrested, I haven't lost all these things, I haven't hurt my family, and they're always looking for ways to continue doing what they're doing. Your story is so different in that you did have a lot of these things starting, but you didn't go nearly to the extent that a lot of people generally do in order to get clean and sober and sustain that length of recovery already.
Right. With hearing everybody else's story, when, it made me nervous, I'm not that bad yet. But when I went to Just Believe, I'm like, I'm not that bad yet, but it doesn't have to be. I don't have to make those yets come true.
Exactly, and you could see the writing on the wall that it would happen eventually if you continued doing what you were doing.
Right. And that made me nervous. I was, like, scared. Like, I don't want, all my yets to come true, and I don't want to have to go through this, pain that doesn't need to be caused.
Absolutely. And you also had, you mentioned your sister's addiction had started a bit before yours and went to a different level, so you had some experience watching that happen as well. Yes.
Most of her yets came true when I was clean. She really put me on the other side of the fence, and the pain that I was feeling, I finally felt from my mother, my sisters, that, wow, I'm feeling this pain. I know that they were feeling this pain. So she, really put me on the other side of the fence, and it sucked, but I obviously needed that. And I am a true believer, and everything happens for a reason.
Of course. Now, as you got out of treatment, you went to the extra length and did the halfway house. Is that what you'd mentioned before?
Yes. I went into a halfway house, and it was actually a little bit strange. It was he was opening another house, which it was me and 3 other girls at the time. And within the next 2 weeks, I was house manager, which I definitely needed. I was in charge of everybody else. I needed to make sure where everybody was. I needed to drug test them, and if something came up wrong, it was important for me to get to the bottom of it. So I needed that structure.
I can see that, and I'm thinking about the opportunity to be able to get outside of your own fears and anxieties, too. It becomes about, watching other people and their patterns and what works and what doesn't. Obviously, you would get a good idea of when people are starting to get off track and know that for yourself that wasn't going to work. So,
right.
How long were you in the halfway house?
I was there for about 4.5 months.
And that was a continuous, like you said, it was structure and meetings and that type of thing. They do have at Just Believe they have the recovery residences now, which they didn't have when you were there. And that gives people the chance to do the same thing, because it's so important after someone gets out of treatment. That's a 30-day, a month out of their life, and it changes a lot of behaviors and things that happen along the way. But when you start to get back into real life, that's when the real challenge happens, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I came home in August, and I thought for sure that I would have a job, and I didn't. So eventually I went back to my old boss, and he sat on it for a little bit. He was unsure with it, and he ended up taking me back, thank goodness. But it was a little difficult being out here, because I knew people in recovery, and I was going to meetings, but I didn't have the support system that I had in Florida.
And
so it was a little difficult for me in New Jersey in the beginning.
And that's when a lot of people actually end up relapsing. They have a number of old triggers, people, places, and things that they go back to, and that's a really hard transition. What do you think made the difference for you without the steady recovery? What stayed constant in your mind that was able to keep you doing the right things that you needed to do to stay clean?
I did not want to. I didn't have much at the time, but I knew where I could go if I continued to move forward, and I wasn't willing to risk me losing what I've already have or what I could possibly gain with me being clean. I have a nephew that I absolutely love, and he needed me at the time. My sisters seen me doing well, and for me to go throw that away, it's like I almost spit in their face, you know, so I didn't want to hurt anybody, and I wanted to see where I could possibly go.
Okay. And we are about out of time, Brittany. If you have one message that you'd like people out there to hear that think that, you know, they're starting on that path to having a problem, but that, again, not hearing all of the things that you didn't hear in the beginning, the yets, what would you offer them that would give them, you know, the belief that they could get clean and sober long before a lot of the really bad consequences start, like you have?
I would tell them to definitely look into getting help. Just because it's not bad yet, it will go there, but you don't have to. It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to. You can stop now and be the story that somebody needs to hear.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. I'm so happy for you with your 2-year anniversary. And we are out of time. This is Brenda at Just Believe Radio. Our call-in number is 877-309-3635. Thank you very much for being here, Brittany. And
You're welcome.
All right. We'll be back tomorrow.